Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Voices of Forestry podcast. I'm your host, Seth Stephenson, the communications coordinator with the Arkansas Forestry Association. Now, before we get into this month's topic, we want to give a special shout out and thank you to this month's sponsor, Davis DuBose Knight Forestry and Real Estate. We thank them for their continued support of the show. We're going to hear a little bit more from them later on in this episode. But for now, we're going to get into this month's topic and discussion. We are going to be talking about a state legislator's role in rural communities, and that's a very clunky title, and hopefully I'll have a better one by the time I actually post this. But to help us talk a little bit about that, we are joined today by State Senator Ben Gilmore. Senator Gilmore, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me, Seth. Great to be on. Really appreciate all that you do and the Forestry Association does to be a voice for our loggers, our forestry, our forest industry sector. You guys do a great job at the Capitol, and so thanks for having me. Been looking forward to doing this. So. Hope people actually will listen to what I say. I know they probably do, but they're like, that guy. Why don't we want to hear what he has to say?
Well, no, this is we've got a lot of good questions we want to get to today, and we thank you for the work that you've done. You've helped start the Forestry Caucus here in Arkansas, which is something we're going to get to later on in the episode. But we appreciate you've worked very closely with Max over the past couple years, kind of getting some forestry stuff done for us. They're up at the Capitol, so we appreciate your help with that as well.
Absolutely.
Well, Senator, let's go ahead and let's start off, since you're new to the show, new guest to the show. We'd like to start off kind of getting a little our folks' backgrounds a little bit. So just give us your history.
Yeah, absolutely. So grew up in Crossett, Arkansas, which is way down south, about 8 miles from the Louisiana border, right in the heart of the fiber basket, in the heart of timber country. And so grew up there, was never really interested in politics, quite frankly. I was doing some like nonprofit work in the community. Actually, one of my very first jobs was an electrical apprentice, just sort of trying to figure out what I wanted to do out of high school. Realized really quick that was a great job and learned some great skills, but didn't think I wanted to do that for a career. Not say anything wrong with it. We need more electricians and more plumbers and more vocational folks. But so that I started off doing that, and then I got, like I said, into more of the nonprofit sector, wanted to get more involved in the community. And there was an opening at the local library, and they wanted somebody who would help do some fundraising, some marketing work, just help sell the library, as I used to say. And so I got involved in that. And that's like, I would say, probably an extreme from being in the forestry timber sector, but I think there's a couple of comparisons. There's paper and books. So there's that perspective, but really enjoyed that. Got really involved in doing some community work. Got involved in local civic clubs, and I thought, well, this whole politics thing's pretty interesting, and started paying attention to local politics. Started paying attention to some of the state and national stuff. Had a brother who was involved in politics, and he actually sort of sucked me into that vortex. And I was going to college at UAM at the time, and so I was full-time job, part-time student at UAM, and I was just kind of looking for something else to do. So I got involved in some political races, and I guess you'd say the rest is history. But to just sort of talk through some of that, because I do think it's important when we're talking, the understanding of the forestry sector and the forestry industry. I met Congressman Bruce Westerman on the campaign trail, and a couple of events, got to not know him really well, but just sort of in a conversational way, got to visit with him a little bit. And I got a phone call in December of 2014 from the congressman-elect, and he said, I'd like to offer you a job. And so I had the distinct honor and privilege to go work for the only forester in Congress. So I got to learn a lot about the issues relating to our forest and trees and logging industry. And so I went to work for him on staff there, and basically I was heavily focused on the forestry side of things. And as someone who's very young, getting into politics, getting into all these issues, there was a lot to learn, but I had probably one of the best mentors and teachers in Congressman Westerman. So had a great experience there for about 3 years. And then Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin called and offered me a job about after 3 years working for the congressman, said, "Hey, I want you to come join my staff." He was lieutenant governor at the time. So I left there to go work for him, being his deputy chief of staff and communications director.
Okay.
And so I had the federal experience working on forestry-related issues and other things. Then I got the state experience and got to hang out at the state capitol and got to build those relationships. And probably is where I really realized what you guys do as a forestry association here in Arkansas, also nationally, but specifically here. Got to see y'all in action at the Capitol, and got to, because of working for Lieutenant Governor Tim Griffin, got to be in the state Senate every time that he was in the chamber, and got to meet a lot of my now colleagues and got to watch the process, and I was just fascinated with it. And then I decided that I don't know why. I guess I was a little bit crazy, but decided to throw my hat in the ring and get into politics at an elected level, and won that race, and now here I am. But throughout that whole process that I've sort of outlined, forestry has been probably my number one issue that I've been focused on, because it is so important to my region, to my district, and to the state.
And that kind of draws us into our next question. You're the representative for District 1, the Senate representative for District 1 here in Arkansas, which covers a good amount of counties in our southeastern part of the state, which, like you said, is essentially the fiber basket. So could you just kind of describe the general landscape of your area that you represent?
So it sort of blows my mind when I think about it. So I have one of the largest Senate districts in the state. It's a very rural district. I love it. There's a lot of diversity there, from the natural landscape of, we got, our streams and rivers. Washita River runs right through the heart of my district, and I'm, because I represent Chico County as the far southeast that I go, which borders the Mississippi River. So obviously waterways are important to my district, but I go all the way north up to Grant County, and so I have a little sliver of Grant County. And so there's a lot of diversity there, right? I mean, arguably Grant County is like a suburb of Little Rock. And so my district runs from, I tell people all the time, runs from like a suburb of Little Rock all the way down to the Louisiana line and over to the Mississippi line. So I have 8 counties. We're Ashley, Chico, DeShay, Drew, Bradley, Cleveland. I used to have all parts of Cleveland. I have all of Cleveland now. And I have parts of Lincoln County and parts of Grant County. And so that's a very broad swath of area.
Oh, yeah.
But there's one common theme throughout that district, and that's trees. And so we've got a little bit of everything from manufacturing to poultry to wood products facilities to everything in between. So it's a very diverse district with a lot of great people. But again, that common theme is the forestry and wood products industry.
Which makes you just the perfect person to represent after being with Westerman and, starting up the Forestry Caucus.
Yeah.
To be kind of, you're very well versed in some of the stuff that we're dealing with.
Well, and that's one of the reasons, I am really interested in this simply because I want to be a good representative of my district, right? And so to do that, you have to be focused on these issues. And thankfully, I had the experience, the learning experience, the education of working basically at all levels of government and working for who I, again, will say is probably the absolute leading authority on these issues, and that's Congressman Bruce Westerman. So I get a chance every time I get a chance, I want to plug what he does and the invaluable voice that he is in Congress for us. And so having that experience, I think, does situate me well to represent the district that I have.
So how important is it with such a large area of coverage that you're representing? How important is it for an elected official like yourself to maintain a close relationship with the people in that very rural community?
Oh, it's vital. I mean, you can't put a value on that, right? I mean, it is so intrinsically valuable to what I do at the state capitol, right? I mean, what I try to do, literally, when I'm driving home leaving Little Rock, I will oftentimes just stop in and visit with folks, or I have about a 2-hour drive, and so it's a great opportunity to just get on the phone and call people and stay in touch with these folks that quite frankly feel like that they haven't had a voice there. I hear that a lot. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to do, was be, number one, very accessible, and then communicate would be two. And then thirdly, I wanted to be a very loud voice at the Capitol. And that's what I ran on. And I told people when I got to the Capitol, hey, look, nothing against anybody here, but I'm going to be as loud and obnoxious as I can, because if I'm not, then nobody else is going to. And so now we have some great state reps that I work with that are colleagues on the House end, but in the Senate, I'm the voice for my area in the Senate, right? And so I have to be a loud voice, because when you look at the makeup of the state and how many people, senators that represent South Arkansas, there's not that many of us. And compare that to North Arkansas, there's a whole lot of them. And so we're advocating, and we have to be loud. We have to be in the room and be in these discussions if our voice for our people is going to be heard. And so that's vital to stay in contact with the people who are on the ground, who live in the district, who, your elected officials, just everyday citizens even, but specifically as it relates to forestry issues, talking to those loggers, talking to those land management folks, talking to the wood fiber industry folks. All of those conversations are vital to how we steer policy at the state capitol.
And I guess, what are some of the challenges that you face, or maybe I want to say you, since you're their voice, but what's some of the challenges that you face trying to make sure that your constituents' voices are heard? Is it just being loud enough, or are there other challenges that you're having to deal with?
Part of it is it's educating, right? So educating my colleagues. And look, I think we're really blessed in Arkansas to have really good legislators who care. And I know that sort of sounds, whatever. Of course I'm going to say that, right? But like, take my colleagues in the House. We've got a really good group of colleagues there in the House, I do, that care about these issues, that are leaders in these issues. Representative Howard Beatty, who is my counterpart for the Forestry Caucus in the House. Representative Jeff Wardlaw, who's been in the House for a long time, really good at what he does, knows these issues very well. He's from Warren, Arkansas, and had helped lead on these forestry-related issues. But beyond that, just outside of it was outside of my district. Now I go all the way to Grant County, so I do have some crossover with Ken Bragg, who has just left the House and left the elected side of politics. But he's an invaluable resource. Ken has been a leader on these issues and someone that I've always looked up to as sort of a mentor in these issues. I hated it when he told me he was going to step back from elected office. But he has been a tremendous asset for us. And so with that, it's, there's work that we do in the Senate, but we have to have those good partners in the House. And so a lot of what it comes down to is those of us who are in the fiber timber basket have to educate our colleagues who maybe are from more urban areas of the state. And so that was the whole premise of starting the Forestry Caucus. Because we wanted that platform to be able to educate our colleagues. And so it's amazing when you have these conversations with people and they're like, wow, I didn't know that. I didn't know how important this was, or I didn't know that this led to this, or whatever it might be. You sort of see the wheels turning and it clicks. And so it's really fun to see that. But again, really good folks who care about these issues, but they may just not understand it because it's not something that is as important in their district as it is mine. And so there's that constant education. So
it sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong here, just pretty solid teamwork all the way around from just about every representative in the state that's willing to sit down and learn and listen to what some of the issues your folks are facing.
Well, and I think even beyond that, I think by and large what people – now, look, we may disagree on things, and that's just the way this works, right? And it doesn't mean that someone's a bad person or anything else. We just have different perspectives, and that's fine. And I think that that's a good thing. Diversity of perspective is a good thing. But I would say not to use a cliche, but we all care about Arkansas, and we all care about what's best for Arkansas. We may have different ways of getting there, but – we all care about it. We're all sort of working towards that. And at the end of the day, if there's something that helps a colleague in their district that's, I think, good for the state, I'm going to support that. And I think the same is true for me in my district and my House colleagues in their districts. If there's something that helps our district and in turn is going to benefit the state, whether that means more forestry-related jobs in certain parts of the state, well, that's good for the whole state's economy, right? And so I think most every person in the legislature is going to say, hey, I want to help with that because that helps all of us.
Okay. Well, Senator, I think that's a good place to kind of take a quick pause, and we're going to hear a little bit more from our sponsors this month, Davis DuBose Knight, Forestry and Real Estate. DDK proudly supports the AFA. In 1962, Mr. Jerry Davis started DDK with a core value of wanting to help forest landowners. With the professional services that DDK provides, they allow landowners to have complete confidence in their portfolio, knowing that their property is managed at the highest level from an expert team with years of experience. Give Davis DuBose Knight Forestry and Real Estate a call today and let them help you begin your land legacy. 501-219-8600 or visit them at forestryrealestate.com. Thank you once again to our sponsors this month, Davis DuBose Knight, Forestry and Real Estate. Well, Senator, as we get to the tail end of this episode, there's a couple other things I want to talk to you about real quick. And first off, we've been talking about making sure that your constituents' voices are heard. But what, I guess, are some of the issues that they're facing, forestry-related issues, of course, that they may be facing currently?
Yeah. Well, look, I think that's I don't know if we have enough time to get into all of it, right? But a couple of things that I see, right? I think, first of all, workforce is always an issue. We need more people getting into this space. Just to touch on that really briefly, a piece of legislation I ran last session with Representative Ken Bragg created a forestry scholarship at UAM. Think that's vital. It's already been utilized by several students. So we're trying to incentivize people to get into that, right? And so that's huge, and that's a step in the right direction. There's a lot more we can do there. In the last little segment, we talked about teamwork. We talked about how do we work together at the Capitol to make our constituent voices heard. One of the best and probably the prime example I can give of that was the Forest Business Center at UAM. So we worked together, a coalition of us in the Forestry Caucus, worked together. That was Representative Lane Jean, Representative Wardlaw, Representative Howard Beatty, Representative Ken Bragg, and others, but they were the primary leaders on this, and myself in the Senate, pushing to get some additional funding at UAM to start a Forest Business Center. And we talk about challenges that we see for this industry. One of the challenges is going back to that education piece that I already talked about, and making sure people understand the valuable resource that we have in timber and what we can use, and how do we recruit business and industry to come to our state and utilize and harness this valuable resource. And that's exactly what the Forest Business Center at UAM is supposed to do. We got a great team of folks there with Peggy Doss, the chancellor, and Matt Pelkey, who's leading. He's a phenomenal advocate for our forest and business sector of the forest industry. But he's just an invaluable resource in his knowledge base. And he crunches numbers. He's a numbers guy. He's he's a forest economist. So he crunches those numbers. And when he says something, you can believe it. You can take it to the bank because he knows what he's talking about.
Oh, yeah.
And so we want to make sure that he has the resources to be able to do his job, which in turn helps us do our job, helps you guys here at the association do your job, right? So workforce is a challenge. Being able to educate and communicate what we offer and what we can do with that resource is a challenge that I think we're overcoming. But with that, look, we're in an economy right now that's not really friendly to a lot of our businesses, right? Inflation's been skyrocketing. Some of the policies coming out of D.C. have not helped. I'm not going to get super political in that because, we'll save that for another time. But what we need to do is moving forward, we need to find ways that help relieve our businesses of some inflation and other things that are hurting specifically our loggers. And they're struggling right now. Fuel cost is out the roof. It has been it's coming back down a little bit, but it's been very high. And so all of those things, how do we address it on the state level? And I'm going to tell you that's a challenge, right? There's not a whole lot of levers on that side of thing that we can pull at the state side. But there are policies that we're working on. We're working on with you guys to try to give some relief. What are things that we can do to relieve some of the regulatory burden that we're placing unduly on our folks in this sector? And so, there's stuff like that we're constantly working on. As far as I guess a really quick example was one of the bills that we ran last time to change the statute on hauling heavy logging equipment. Over the course of decades, that equipment has gotten bigger with the more industrialized that this has become in logging and forestry. And so that equipment's gotten bigger, but at the same time, the state rules on the weight limits hadn't changed. And I'm talking about the weights on hauling heavy equipment. And so we got with RDOT. They worked with us and really appreciate their efforts there. And we were able to find some common language there that we could all agree with and live with that brought some relief to our loggers and was able to keep them in compliance. And so it helped save a lot of money from the tickets and stuff that were being written simply because RDOT was following the rules. Logging couldn't be in compliance because their equipment was too big and heavy. So we were able to work through that and, talk about just a simple way to bring some relief to those guys. That was a great way to do it. And again, that took a team effort to get there.
So not to step on Schoolhouse Rock's toes or anything here, but I guess could you just maybe give us a pretty brief explanation of when you get one of these, when you talk to one of these loggers or one of your constituents or heck, even us, and you learn about one of these problems that the forestry industry is facing, what happens then from a state capital perspective with you or someone else?
Yeah, well, that's a great question. And this is something that I've been working with folks in my district to understand and why their voice is so valuable in this process. So, if I get a phone call from, either you guys here at the association or just a logger or someone in the forest industry in my district, they call and they say, hey, look, there's this issue and it's putting a burden on us, or, hey, we could do our job so much easier and better if we got rid of this regulation or whatever that might be. That starts a process. That starts conversations. So oftentimes I'm probably going to reach out to the experts. That may be you guys here at the association. That may be Dr. Matt Pelkey at UAM. That may be somebody in another agency. And I'm going to say, hey, walk me through this process, how this works. What is this, this specific language in this statute of the code say, what does this do? And so it starts an education process for myself. And so then once I figure out what that is, I start trying to find a solution for it. So I may come back to you guys, may go back to Matt Pelkey, may go back to that constituent and say, hey, look, what about if we did this? And so we sort of find some commonality there. And then, we'll call over to Bureau of Legislative Research, ask them to maybe do some research. What are we doing in other states? That's always invaluable when you're trying to figure out, we don't want to recreate the wheel, right? Like if somebody's already figured this out, let's use what they're doing. And so we look at that, and so we sort of start building, I guess probably the better way to say it, we start painting a picture, right? So we keep adding a little more paint until we finally get to the point where drafting a bill. And draft a bill, and now I start talking to my colleagues. Hey, guys, here's the issue I got from a constituent. What are you thinking about this? Maybe reach out to some of your constituents, see what they're saying about this. And typically, we just get in a room and sit down and hash it out and say, okay, y'all good with this language, and well, what if we did it this way? And so that whole conversation takes place. And then, you file the bill. And once that bill is made public, you might get some more phone calls. You might get some people who reach out and say, hey, if you change this is going to impact our industry. And so you start working through that. So that's a long process in and of itself, even before the bill is ever heard in the Capitol building. And then when it comes time, though, to hear that bill in committee, if it's forestry related, it's typically going to go through the agriculture committee, which I'm on. And by the time it's heard there, hopefully you've worked out a lot of the kinks. Hopefully it's one of those things that you explain to your colleagues and you get a do-pass motion and you get unanimous vote and it goes to the Senate floor. I wish everything worked that way. Sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
Sometimes there's a lot of debate, and that's a valuable part of it too, right? That debate, because now you're getting other perspectives outside of just your area and your concerns. You're bringing in folks from Northwest Arkansas, from Northeast Arkansas, from Central Arkansas, wherever it might be, who have a different perspective because of the people they represent. And so, a lot of times you guys at the association are there in the room to help be experts and to testify and talk about what's good for your industry and what's not good for your industry, and that's very important. And people need to realize who are in the wood products space need to understand the valuable resource that you guys provide, because we do rely on you guys a lot. And I've told my folks in my district, and I would encourage anybody listening to this, take this to heart, because don't assume that we know everything. I know sometimes politicians like to personify that they're experts and they know it all.
Yeah.
I hope I don't do that. I try not to do that, because I don't. I'll tell you real quick, I don't know. I'm not afraid when I get a phone call and someone says, hey, can you look into this? Hey, I don't know exactly what the answer is. Let me go see if I can find an answer. And sometimes we're acting as air traffic controllers, right? And so don't hesitate to reach out, but also get involved. If you're not on the, I think y'all do newsletters and emails out.
Yeah.
If you're not on that, get on that list, because it is important so that because the reality is I can't communicate to every one of my 90,000 constituents. It's just impossible.
Yeah.
Even though I would like to. And that's why I give my cell phone number out where I speak, and it's on Facebook, it's on the website. Like, there's no reason why you can't get in touch with me. And if you do call and I miss it, I'll try to call you back. I say all that to say it's important to stay in the loop and engaged in the process, because what happens in Little Rock impacts every one of our lives.
Oh, for sure.
And it impacts, specifically, since we're talking about the wood products industry and the wood fiber industry. And so you need to stay plugged in and engaged. And so, hopefully the bill passes committee, it goes to the Senate floor. There's a little bit more debate. Hopefully you've worked out all those kinks, so when you get up there and present the bill, there's no questions, and you get another unanimous vote. And then from there, it's transmitted to the House, where that process starts all over again. And it's sort of rare, but it's also not rare either. Sometimes you miss stuff. Sometimes, it passes one chamber unanimously and goes to another chamber, and they find a flaw in the bill, and it may fail there, or it may get amended there, or it may have a little more of a hurdle to get through and may not get a unanimous vote. It might get a more of a 50-50 type, or 50 plus one vote. But again, that process is so important for making sure that we get good policy. And so what I would tell people listening to this podcast, get engaged, be a part of that process, because it does impact your life. Whether you like it or not, government does impact your life. And so it's better to be engaged on the front end than after the fact saying, well, why'd y'all do this? When, the reality is, if you're engaged, your voice is being heard.
And I think we talk a lot about Arkansas because that's where we currently are, and you are a representative of Arkansas. But a lot of this can be said, or is true for any state.
Oh yes.
Get involved no matter where you're at, and
right?
On a national level, no matter where you're at, there is a way to get involved with your local forestry association or what have you. So this isn't just Arkansas specific.
That's right.
Type information.
That's right. Well, and I will just real quick on that, talking about the national side. Look, it is so important because the national impacts all of our lives in a great way, right? And so for those who live in the 4th District, which is where most of our forestry and all that happens, right, is in the 4th Congressional District, you have a great guy there who understands the issues. And he has people in district offices all across that district who are there to take those calls, hear those concerns, and pass it on to them. So make sure your voice is being heard in the federal process as well.
Yeah, and I guess once you kind of get on a larger federal scale, You may not be able to get in touch with Westerman himself, but
That's
he
right.
does have folks
But
available.
he has his staff that do a great job there. And I know because I used to be one of them. And some of them that I worked with are still there, and they do a fantastic job. I will say, though, it gets a little more complex on that side because now you're competing with other states. You're competing with – and we do that too as on the state level. We're constantly competing. Not only are we competing, South Arkansas versus North Arkansas or whatever, we're competing with other states. The state's been called a laboratory for ideas, right? And that's exactly what we're dealing with. If we steal stuff from other states, if it's a good idea, we'll take it.
Yeah.
And that's okay. That's part of what I think our founders intended with the founding of our country. And so that's okay to do that, but make no mistake, when we're looking at policies and Mississippi does something and Louisiana does something, and we're sort of in the middle, and it's a good policy that we haven't done, we're at a competitive disadvantage. And so we're constantly having to evolve and educate ourselves so that we can compete with the states around us.
And it sounds almost like a weird competitive teamwork thing where, I'm sure you've spoken with other representatives in other states just to see what in the world they're doing. But yeah, there is a competitive side to it.
There is a competitive side. You've got a good relationship with a couple of guys down in Louisiana. They're just south. Our districts actually border each other. And we sort of joke all the time, hey, we're going to run this bill, y'all better get with it, So it is all typically in good-natured fun. But the reality is when we're talking about tax cuts, we want to spur job growth. Well, if a state has a lower tax rate than we do, we understand we're at a competitive disadvantage. If they have fewer regulations than we do, we're at a competitive disadvantage. And so we're constantly having to work through that. That's one of the things with like that bill that I talked about with hauling heavy equipment. We were at a disadvantage with that. We were a little bit behind on that. So again, that's where it comes down to it. When you have a good idea, a good policy, you can work with folks at RDOT and you can work with your colleagues here in the state and get some good policy done.
So Senator, we're getting to the wrap-up point here, but before we do that, I want to talk about the Forestry Caucus. You mentioned it earlier in the episode, saying it was kind of created to be an education tool. Yeah, an education tool. So I guess where does the Forestry Caucus fit into this whole process that we just discussed? Where does that come into play? Where does this group come into play?
Well, I think it's vital to the process, and of course I'm going to say that I'm the Senate chair of it. But what we wanted to do is we wanted a platform to be able to educate our colleagues. And when we kicked off, Representative Beatty and myself, as well as Representative Wardlaw and Senator Charles Beckham from Magnolia, who is not back with us, but was certainly a big part of this. When we kicked this off, we understood that there was a void that we needed to fill with educating people on our issues. You look at the legislature, there's other caucuses for different things, but a state that's so heavily dependent on a forest-based economy, to not have a forestry caucus, quite frankly, there's just a huge void. And so we understood that. And what we wanted to do was create something where we could bring people together, maybe feed them a good meal, but have some sort of a commonality where they cared about these issues or wanted to learn more about these issues, but it gave us a platform to talk about things that are important. We're going to be holding another meeting here pretty soon, but we had one back in late fall of 22, and we wanted to have one before we got into the legislative session. In part, we wanted to thank Ken Bragg for his efforts, and so we recognized him there. We had Congressman Westerman come and speak and share from a national perspective things they're working on. We had other industry leaders there talk about what was important to their industry. We had UAM there to talk about what they're doing and the resources they provide at UAM. So it's a space for folks to come in and share what's going on. And if you don't know where to get the resources, those people are in the room and you can go talk to them. And that's what we wanted. But even more importantly than that, I invited folks up from my district that are loggers, that are maybe chip truck drivers, people who work in that space. Maybe they own a business, but we had folks who were just employees that maybe drive a log truck at that meeting. And why is that important? Well, it's important to tell the story of of the lives that are impacted by this industry. And we wanted to do that because I can tell you my district looks really different from, let's say, Greg Ledding's district in Northwest Arkansas, the Fayetteville area. And Greg is someone who sits on the agriculture committee, forestry, and economic development. We usually say agriculture a lot. We don't usually say the forestry and economic development side, but it is the agriculture, forestry, and economic development committee. Greg sits on that. And Greg will tell you, like, he's not an expert in these issues. He wants to learn, and he wants to understand it more. And so that's where these conversations are important. So pulling together, a group of our colleagues in the Forestry Caucus to sit there and share information, share resources, but then let them hear stories from people who are impacted by this industry and whose livelihood depend on it is so important. You can't put a price tag on it. We had a guy there the last meeting who his job, he drives log trucks, and he's a mechanic on log trucks. And I can tell you that when the economy was getting really tight, inflation was getting really high, gas prices were going up, I can tell you he was concerned.
Oh, yeah.
I know. I talked to him. And so those stories are important when we're talking about policy from a state and national level. And so that's the importance of a forestry caucus. Its number one priority is to educate our colleagues and help get them in touch with the resources so that they can be better informed to make decisions.
Okay. Well, Senator, let me be I'm sure I'm not the first, but let me say thank you for your work on that caucus. It's been a big help, I know, for us, and it'll only continue to be an excellent tool in our forestry tool belt, if you will. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Is there anything, though, that I know this is kind of the tail end of the episode, and is there anything else that you want to say or you'd like to add before we start wrapping this up?
Well, again, I'll go back to what I already said really briefly. Don't assume we already know. Reach out to us. Stay engaged with us. Again, we can't be in touch with everybody in our district, so don't assume that we may have already heard something. Make sure your voice is heard in the process, because I can tell you there's a lot of competing voices happening at the state capitol building. There's a lot of people that are pulling on us for time and other things, and if you're not communicating with your state rep or your state senator or the governor's office or even you guys at the association, there's a good chance that we may not even know of the issue that's taking place that's impacting you. And so that's so important. And I'm going to do it here because I do it everywhere. There's no reason you can't get in touch with me. Call, text, whatever it might be, whatever you're comfortable with. My cell number is 501-467-5952. You don't have a reason to not call me because I just gave you the number.
Well, there you go.
So I hope people utilize it. And look, if you're in my district and listening to that, call me if you have a concern. But if you're not, and if you're invested in this space and you are part of this wood fiber sector, reach out to me. I'd love to hear any way that we as a forestry caucus or we as legislators can help make your life better. And
one of the many drums that we beat here on this show is, if nothing is said, nothing is done. Right. And all it takes is to pick up a phone or shoot a quick email to someone to get that concern heard or to get the ball rolling on trying to find a resolution.
Yeah. And look, it may be a long process, and it may be years before you see resolution on that, but it's got to start somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Senator Gilmore, thank you again, man, for joining us today. I know
Absolutely.
We tried to get you. Well, good. I'm glad.
We need to do this again.
100%. Yeah, we'd love to have you back on. We wanted to make sure we snagged you, and thank you for giving us some time out of your schedule. I know the session started earlier in January, so you've probably had just a buck wild couple of weeks.
I know you've heard it said before, Seth, it's like drinking from a fire hydrant.
Yo, trust me, so. I understand the feeling. So, well, Senator, thank you again for joining us, and we really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having me on.
And we want to thank you guys for joining us this month. Again, a special shout out and a thank you to our sponsors this month, Davis DuBose Knight Forestry and Real Estate. I cannot express enough how much we appreciate their support of the show, and they've done this multiple months now, so we really appreciate them. And we want to give another special shout out and thank you to some guy named Rob McCormick for the use of our theme song, The Same Love. That's off of his album, The Folkster. You can find more of his music on Spotify. And as always, we'll have a link to his website with tour dates and music information in the description of this episode. So make sure you come back and join us next month when we'll have a new topic, a new discussion, and a new Voice of Forestry.